The universe never withholds its treasures. It only waits until consciousness is ready to receive. Every gift that arrives in your life does not come by chance, but by resonance, by the subtle alignment between what you seek and what seeks you. When the inner frequency reaches the same tone as the gift, the doors open without effort. This is not mysticism. It is the quiet law of correspondence that has governed existence since the first light stirred in the void. Desire alone does not summon the universe. Readiness does. Many pray, demand, or chase after miracles. Yet the universe remains silent, not because it denies them, but because their hearts are not yet tuned to what they ask for. A vessel that is not shaped cannot hold water. A field that is unplowed cannot receive the seed. Every longing you carry is an announcement of what you are becoming. The reason some dreams remain distant is not that they are impossible, but that the soul is still being sculpted to contain them. The law is simple. When the inner condition ripens, the outer manifestation follows as naturally as dawn follows night. Everything in creation moves according to this rhythm of readiness. The river does not rush to the sea before carving its bed. The seed does not bloom before surrendering to the darkness. Likewise, no blessing comes before the consciousness has matured enough to live in harmony with it. What you seek is not hiding from you. It is waiting for you to become the version of yourself that can truly receive it without fear, without pride, without attachment. To want something is easy. To be prepared for it is another story. Preparation is not physical, but spiritual. It is the quiet alignment of thought, feeling, and faith into a single vibration of certainty. When this harmony is reached, the universe moves without hesitation. The merchant in Damascus could not sell her wares until each buyer was ready for what they represented. The same law unfolds in every life. We receive only what corresponds to our level of awareness. This is why two people can stand before the same opportunity, and one sees limitation while the other sees destiny. The difference is readiness. The unready mind sees randomness. The ready soul sees pattern. Readiness is the true prayer that the universe answers. Every event, every delay, every detour is part of the shaping. What appears as waiting is in truth preparation. The universe does not withhold. It calibrates. It ensures that what arrives will not destroy by its weight or distort by its magnitude. Those who try to force the rhythm of life often discover that haste brings decay. When a fruit is plucked too early, it is bitter. When an idea is manifested before its time, it collapses under its own immaturity. The universe waits not out of cruelty, but out of mercy. It knows the right season for every flowering. Those who learn to trust this timing live in quiet power. They do not rush. They align. They do not beg. They prepare. When gratitude replaces anxiety, the current of life begins to flow unobstructed. Gratitude is the signal that you already recognize the presence of the unseen gift. It transforms desire from lack into readiness. Each moment of awareness is an act of shaping. Each breath taken in peace polishes the inner mirror through which the universe reflects its abundance. The secret is not to demand more light, but to clean the glass. What you see outside is only the echo of your inner state. If confusion reigns within, the world appears chaotic. If order reigns within, life arranges itself in silent precision. The soul that has learned this no longer prays for things. It prays for clarity, because it knows that once clarity is restored, everything else follows. The universe speaks in the language of resonance, not request. It does not respond to words, but to vibration. A thought of fear sends one message. A thought of faith sends another. Every feeling, every image you hold becomes a magnetic signal, shaping reality around you. That is why Murphy taught that the subconscious mind never sleeps. It is the silent workshop of the divine, constantly molding form according to the patterns you impress upon it. When you learn to impress only the vibration of readiness, miracles appear without noise. You need not chase them. You need only align with them. Readiness is not achieved through struggle, but through surrender. It is not passivity, but intelligent stillness, the calm conviction that the law of life works perfectly when you no longer interfere. To be ready is to have released resistance. The unready mind demands proof before believing. The ready heart believes and therefore sees. The universe does not need to be convinced. It needs to be allowed. When you reach that quiet state where desire and trust become one, the thing you seek must appear. It cannot do otherwise, for the law is exact. There is no punishment or reward in this, only resonance. The story of every soul is the story of remembering this rhythm. We wander, we learn, we suffer, until we understand that nothing real is ever lost, and nothing meant for us can be withheld. The moment you stop striving and start allowing, the universe moves toward you with infinite precision. Its treasures unfold not with thunder, but with quiet inevitability. The prayer becomes thank you instead of please. In that single shift from demand to gratitude, the frequency changes, the vessel fills, and the unseen becomes visible. That is the ritual of the universe. Not ceremony or incantation, but alignment. When you become the vibration of what you seek, it appears as if by miracle, though in truth it was never apart from you. It was simply waiting for you to become ready to receive. In the heart of Damascus, where the scent of saffron mingled with the hum of prayer, there was once a marketplace unlike any other. It was said that those who entered it were not merely buyers and sellers, but seekers and mirrors of one another's readiness. Among them stood a merchant named Jessica. Her stall was small, hidden between towers of spice and mountains of myrrh, yet those who stumbled upon it felt something stir deep within. Upon her shelves rested vessels that shimmered faintly with their own light, mirrors that reflected more than faces, and rings forged from the remnants of fallen wishes. But no matter how beautiful her wares were, they refused to be sold. Gold turned to dust in her hands, silver vanished into air, and each time she tried to bargain, the items grew cold and dull, as if offended by the transaction. One evening, burdened with disappointment, Jessica asked an old woman passing by, "Why does nothing I sell remain?" The woman smiled, eyes glinting with the knowing of ages. "Perhaps, child, it is not that they refuse to be sold. Perhaps they are waiting to be chosen." That night, as the lanterns dimmed and the city slept, Jessica noticed a traveler approach. His clothes were worn, his face marked by long roads and unanswered prayers. He picked up a simple copper bowl that no one else had wanted. The moment his fingers touched it, light rippled across its surface like dawn on still water. "I have searched half the world for this," he whispered, and without her asking, he left a handful of coins on her table. For the first time, the payment remained solid in her palm. The bowl had found its owner. From that day forward, Jessica understood that her goods possessed a secret life of their own. They appeared ordinary to the unready, but awakened in the hands of those whose hearts had reached the right note of need. A mother grieving her lost child found a pendant that sang lullabies no one else could hear. A blind poet received a scroll whose words were raised like braille upon the page, and to each Jessica offered nothing more than presence. She no longer tried to sell. She simply waited. Her shop became a reflection of the law that governs all creation, that nothing of real value can be taken by force, only received by resonance. The universe operates in the same way. Every blessing, every revelation, every meeting waits until the consciousness vibrates in harmony with it. When your heart finally matches the frequency of the gift, it manifests effortlessly, as though it had been waiting at the edge of your awareness all along. So often we try to buy our way into destiny, trading effort for outcome, demanding results as if the sacred could be negotiated. But true exchange is never about price. It is about readiness. The energy you bring determines what appears before you. When fear drives your seeking, even gold turns to dust. When love and surrender lead, even a simple bowl becomes a vessel of light. The Damascus merchant's story is your story. How many times have you tried to grasp something that slipped away, a dream, a relationship, a moment of peace, only to realize later that it wasn't rejection, it was protection? The thing itself was waiting for you to become aligned with its truth. What if what you call delay is simply divine timing? What if what you chase is already circling back to meet you, but can only find you when you become still enough to receive it. The marketplace of the universe is vast, yet every item, every opportunity, every encounter is specific to the vibration of your being. The question is not what you can buy, but what you are truly ready to hold. And so, listener, let me ask you now, what in your life has been quietly refusing to be sold? What desire keeps dissolving each time you try to grasp it, as if reminding you that it cannot be earned, only received? Maybe it is peace, maybe love, maybe the quiet certainty that you are enough. Whatever it is, perhaps it is not absent, but waiting, shimmering just beyond reach, until you become the one who can hold it without fear of losing it. The universe is a precise merchant. It deals only in resonance. When your energy shifts from want to worthiness, from demand to gratitude, everything that once eluded you begins to appear with astonishing grace. You cannot trick the cosmos with pretense. You cannot speak the language of abundance while harboring the vibration of lack. What you are speaks louder than what you say. Jessica learned that her role was not to persuade or to sell, but to embody trust. Each night she lit her lantern and whispered, "Let what is meant to find its way," and it always did. In the same way, your task is not to chase what you desire, but to become the space in which it feels at home. When you do, life moves toward you with a subtle rhythm that feels both miraculous and inevitable. Gratitude becomes the currency of exchange. Every breath becomes a silent transaction between you and the infinite. When you recognize the gifts that are already here, the unseen protections, the quiet lessons, the fleeting joys, you signal to the universe that you are ready for more. Gratitude does not beg, it affirms. It declares readiness without noise. Each time you say thank you for what is, you open another invisible door to what can be. The merchant of Damascus is still there, somewhere in the realm between spirit and matter, tending her stall in that eternal market where nothing is random and everything is chosen. Our lesson is simple. The treasures of life do not come when you ask for them, but when you are ready to honor them. Oh, as you listen now, ask yourself quietly, what am I ready to receive? The answer may rise not in words, but in a feeling, a small unfolding in the chest, a soft warmth of recognition that tells you the exchange has already begun. Thank you, dear listener, for being here in this moment of awareness. By listening, you have already entered the marketplace of the unseen, and something, somewhere, has recognized your readiness. In the volcanic valleys of Mount Olympus lived a blacksmith named Brandon, whose forge sang with a rhythm that few could hear. His hands were strong, his mastery undeniable, yet something in his work had grown hollow. Each day he struck iron with the precision of habit, and though his blades gleamed like captured sunlight, they felt lifeless in his grip. He mistook repetition for mastery, force for creation. One morning, a stubborn piece of iron refused to yield beneath his hammer. Sparks flew, metal shrieked, and at the final blow the hammer shattered. Brandon stared at the fractured tool, confusion mingling with awe. For years he had conquered metal, shaping it through sheer strength. Yet now it defied him completely. In the silence that followed, a strange understanding began to stir. Perhaps, he thought, it is not the iron that resists me. Perhaps it is I who resist it. That night he sat before the dying fire of his forge, listening to the whisper of cooling embers. His exhaustion became stillness, and in that stillness something extraordinary occurred. The metal spoke, not in words, but in rhythm, like a pulse beneath the earth. "You strike too loudly," it said within him. "You do not hear the song beneath the surface. Creation is not conquered by force, but revealed by surrender." When morning came, he approached the forge, not as a battlefield, but as an altar. Instead of hammering against the metal, he began to listen. The first blows were hesitant, but as he followed the unseen rhythm, the metal softened, flowing beneath his hand like liquid light. Day by day, his movements became gentler, more deliberate, until every strike aligned with the silent cadence of the material. The results were beyond reason. Blades that cut through darkness instead of flesh. Shields that turned away fear instead of arrows. The villagers called his creations miracles, yet Brandon knew they were not his doing. They were born from harmony, not control. When he worked from dominance, the metal resisted. When he worked from surrender, it revealed its perfection. Word spread across kingdoms. A prince, hearing of his legendary craft, arrived demanding to learn the secret. Brandon placed a piece of iron before him. "Listen first," he said. The prince laughed. "Iron does not speak." "Then you will never hear it," Brandon replied, and returned to his work. The truth is that every element of creation holds its own consciousness, waiting to align with the mind that approaches it without ego. Force fractures what surrender refines. The universe, like the forge, responds not to command but to attunement. Each time you try to bend life to your will, you create resistance. But when you listen, when you move in the quiet rhythm of its flow, everything yields with grace. Brandon discovered that the real forge was not the fire before him, but the one within his own heart. The hammer and the anvil were merely reflections of the ceaseless shaping of the soul. Every blow of frustration, every spark of failure was tempering his spirit, burning away the alloy of pride until only pure awareness remained. Through surrender, he became one with the act of creation itself. He no longer worked to prove mastery, but to participate in the sacred rhythm that had existed since the beginning of time. To an untrained eye, he was still a blacksmith. To those who understood, he was a priest of transformation. His forge became a sanctuary where the elements spoke and were heard, where effort gave way to ease, and where every object forged carried the vibration of balance. The lesson hidden in his story is simple and exact. What you try to force will harden against you. What you meet in stillness will reveal itself. Life itself is molten matter, constantly shaping and reshaping in the fires of experience. When you resist its heat, you become brittle. When you surrender to its rhythm, you become indestructible. The greatest strength is born from softness, not domination. That is the paradox of divine creation. Brandon's greatest revelation came during a storm when lightning struck near his workshop, splitting a tree beside the forge. He stood before the blaze, unafraid. The storm raged, yet he felt no threat. The fire outside and the fire within were one. That night he crafted his finest work, a sword so light it seemed to hum with its own breath. When he lifted it, the blade vibrated in perfect harmony with the storm. It was no longer a weapon, but a song made visible. The prince who once mocked him returned to see the creation and, trembling, asked to hold it. Brandon placed it gently in his hands. The sword grew heavy, dull, lifeless. It rejected him. In that moment, the prince understood. The blade's power did not lie in its form, but in the consciousness that forged it. Creation recognizes its own vibration. What is born of surrender will not obey the hand of pride. Brandon smiled softly. The universe works this way, he said. It grants its power only to those who no longer seek to control it. He placed the sword back upon the anvil, where it glowed faintly as if alive. The forge sang again, a low, endless hum that seemed to echo from the heart of the cosmos. He realized that every act of creation, whether hammering iron or shaping destiny, is a dialogue, not a conquest. To listen is to participate in the divine rhythm. To force is to fall out of tune. In time, his forge became silent. He no longer needed tools. He had become the fire itself, shaping reality with awareness alone. The villagers said that when he finally left his workshop, the sound of his hammer lingered in the air for days, as though the mountains themselves continued his work. But the truth is that he never left. The blacksmith song is eternal. It rings wherever someone stops struggling and begins to listen. It is heard in the artist's brush, the healer's touch, the thinker's insight, and the quiet breath of one who has learned to let life move through them. That song is the sound of alignment, the power that does not dominate but flows. And those who hear it discover the secret that Brandon forged in silence. Nothing in this universe yields to force, but everything responds to harmony. High in the peaks of ancient Persia, where the sky seemed close enough to touch, lived an astronomer named Michel, who devoted her life to the stars. Her observatory, carved from crystal and silence, overlooked valleys where winds carried secrets older than memory. Every night she charted constellations with flawless precision, mapping the heavens with the discipline of a mathematician and the reverence of a monk. Yet there was one mystery. that tormented her, the prophecy of a star said to awaken humanity's hidden wisdom. For years she calculated its position, searching the horizon, scanning every inch of sky where her charts declared it should burn, but all she found was emptiness. Night after night she waited, certain that her instruments must one day confirm what her mind already believed. They never did. The absence became an ache that shadowed her every breath. One evening, exhausted from failure, she left her instruments and lay beneath the open sky. The stars shimmered with indifference, distant and unyielding. As she drifted between wakefulness and sleep, a child's laughter echoed from the path below. A little girl wandered into the observatory, eyes shining with innocent wonder. "There it is," she said softly, pointing toward the dark patch of sky Michel had studied for decades. "The star that sings." Michel frowned, following the girl's finger. "I see nothing," she whispered. The child giggled, touching her own chest. "You're looking with these," she said, tapping her eyes. "You must look with this." And she placed a small hand over Michel's heart. The words struck like lightning in silence. When the girl left, Michel remained, trembling with something she could not explain. That night she extinguished her lanterns, set aside her telescope, and closed her eyes. Instead of searching outward, she turned inward, into the vast and uncharted expanse of her own awareness. At first, there was only darkness. Then, beneath the noise of thought, she sensed a faint radiance pulsing quietly, not in the sky, but within her. When she opened her eyes again, tears blurred her vision. There, above the mountains, the star shone not newly born, but newly seen. It had always been there, invisible to the intellect, but visible to the awakened heart. Its light traveled not through distance, but through consciousness. It was not an object, but a mirror. The star existed in exact proportion to her readiness to perceive it. In that moment, she understood that the universe never hides its truth. It simply waits for the mind to grow silent enough to see. She realized that all her years of searching had been necessary only to exhaust her belief that searching was required. The maps, the formulas, the restless striving each had been a veil woven by the very mind that yearned to see beyond veils. The revelation was both humbling and liberating. The mystery she had pursued across galaxies had been shining within her all along. The next morning she returned to her observatory and gazed upon her instruments with new eyes. They were no longer tools of discovery, but symbols of limitation, fragments of an old way of knowing. From then on she taught that true observation begins when perception turns inward. She spoke not of telescopes and angles, but of clarity and stillness, of the courage to see without filters. Students traveled across continents to learn from her, expecting cosmic secrets. What they received was silence, for in that silence their vision deepened until the ordinary sky transformed before them. Some wept, seeing beauty they had never noticed. Others trembled as invisible patterns began to emerge, constellations woven not of light but of awareness itself. The missing star became legend, but Michel knew it was never missing. It was the symbol of every truth hidden not by distance but by blindness. To see it was to awaken. And now, as you listen, I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself, what stars in your life have you been trying to find with your eyes instead of your heart? What truths have remained invisible, not because they are far away, but because you have been looking from the wrong place? There are doors that will not open until you stop knocking and realize you already stand inside. There are lights that will not appear until you close your eyes. Perhaps what you have been seeking, the peace, the purpose, the clarity, has never been elsewhere. It has only been waiting for your awareness to become clear enough to recognize it. And when it does, life rearranges itself around that recognition. The universe mirrors your state of being. The clearer you become, the brighter it shines. If these words reach you in the quiet space between breaths, if something within you feels as though it has been seen, then you have already taken the first step toward that awakening. I would love to know that you are here, present in this moment of realization. Comment below with the words times Toi San Seng, Thay Doi times, or simply type the number times 1* to affirm that readiness within you. It is not for me, but for you to signal to your own consciousness that you are prepared to see beyond the old horizon, to lift your eyes not outward but inward. Thank you for listening, for sharing this silence disguised as story. Somewhere, perhaps even now, a new light has begun to shimmer not above you but within you, and it will never fade again. In the misty valleys of Tibet, where clouds rested gently upon the shoulders of mountains, lived a healer named Timothy who was said to mend ailments no other could. His remedies were simple, drawn from dew petals and the quiet pulse of the earth. Yet what fascinated travelers most was not the wonder of his cures, but their mystery. The same flower that restored one life might fail entirely for another. A handful of spring water healed a fevered child, yet did nothing for the nobleman who brought it home in gold vessels. Even Timothy, wise in the language of herbs, could not explain this contradiction. He prayed, he studied, he questioned the spirits of the forest, but silence answered him. One dawn, while gathering lotus dew, an old monk appeared on the path. The healer bowed in respect. "Tell me, master, why does the same remedy heal one and fail another?" The monk's smile was like the soft light of morning. "Because you think the medicine lives in the leaf," he said. "Its power does not reside in matter, but in the space between readiness and need." Then, as quietly as mist dissolving in sun, he vanished. Those words sank deep into Timothy's awareness. That evening he sat by the fire and watched his patients as they came, some trembling with faith, others armed with doubt. He noticed that those who arrived humble and open often left whole, while those who demanded healing as their right remained untouched. Slowly he began to understand. Healing was not a transaction but a meeting point. The medicine was a bridge, not the source. The true power came from the invisible current connecting giver and receiver, a resonance of surrender and trust. The following days changed him. He no longer treated illness as an enemy to be defeated, but as a messenger to be understood. To those who came in fear, he offered silence before remedy. To those who came with pride, he gave nothing but stillness until their hearts softened. When they were ready, even the simplest herb carried the strength of the universe. One afternoon, a nobleman arrived, furious and desperate, bringing his fevered daughter in a jeweled carriage. He demanded the most potent cure. Timothy filled a wooden cup with water from a nearby stream and handed it to the child. The father's anger flared. "You mock us with this simplicity?" But the girl, too weak to protest, drank quietly. Within hours, her fever broke. The father fell to his knees, tears mixing with disbelief. The healer spoke softly. The water became medicine because she received it without resistance. You wanted power. She wanted peace. The lesson of her healing is the lesson of all life. What the mind tries to control, the heart must release before it can transform. Each cure begins with humility. Over the years, Timothy's fame grew, yet he grew quieter. People came from far kingdoms seeking his secret, and he told them the same words. The body listens to the soul, and the soul listens to readiness. Where there is no surrender, no remedy can enter. The plants, the minerals, the waters, all obey the law of consciousness. They respond not to dosage, but to vibration. When the heart aligns with faith, even dust becomes divine nectar. When it aligns with doubt, even nectar turns to dust. In his final years, Timothy taught his apprentices not to memorize recipes, but to cultivate stillness. Feel before you act, he would say. The pulse you treat in others is the echo of your own. Heal from your center, not your fear. And they learned that every herb had a spirit, every illness a voice. Once, during a long winter, when supplies ran thin, Timothy gathered ordinary stones from a frozen stream. He prayed over them, not for magic, but for presence, and placed them upon the beds of the sick. Many recovered. When asked how, he smiled. The stones remind the body of its forgotten wholeness. They hold no power, but awaken what was asleep. True healing does not add what is missing. It restores awareness of what was never lost. That became his final teaching. Healing is not an act. It is a return. The body mends when the mind releases its argument with life. The heart softens, the flow returns, and the divine current moves unobstructed. When he died, the villagers found his garden blooming with impossible colors, as if each plant remembered his touch. Travelers still speak of the valley where the dew tastes faintly of sweetness and wounds close faster in its air. They call it the valley of listening, for there the silence itself seems alive. And perhaps this is the truest form of healing, to listen so deeply that life feels heard again. Every ailment, every sorrow, every fracture is waiting for that moment of recognition, the moment when we stop fighting and begin to trust the intelligence within creation. The healer's art is not to impose recovery, but to invite remembrance. The same law governs the soul. What you wish to heal in your life will not yield to control. It waits for your readiness to release the story of struggle. Healing does not descend from above. It rises from within, the way dawn rises from night. In the stillness beneath pain lies an untouched wholeness, the quiet certainty that you were never broken, only unaware of your completeness. That is the medicine the monk meant, and that is the secret Timothy finally understood. The universe heals through those who have learned to listen. In a quiet mountain village hidden beneath flowering plum trees lived a baker named Amanda, whose bread was said to carry the taste of light. Each dawn she rose before the sun, kneading dough in silence as mist drifted through her window. Her bakery was small, barely large enough to hold the scent of rising loaves, yet people came from distant towns drawn by a warmth they could not explain. Some claimed her bread eased sorrow, others said it opened their hearts to forgotten memories. But Amanda herself never spoke of miracles. She only baked. What puzzled her was not the mystery people attributed to her bread, but its inconsistency. Some mornings her loaves emerged golden and fragrant, as if blessed by unseen hands. Other days, despite using the same ingredients, the bread felt heavy, lifeless, untouched by grace. She tried altering recipes, adjusting temperatures, changing the wood in her oven, yet nothing restored the quiet magic that once flowed through her work. One morning, as she kneaded dough beneath a pale sky, an old woman appeared at her door. The stranger's eyes carried both kindness and distance, as though she looked not at Amanda but through her. "Your hands, child," the woman said softly. "They shape more than bread." Amanda stopped, her palms dusted in flour. "Then why does it sometimes rise and sometimes die?" The woman traced her finger across the counter, drawing invisible patterns. "Because the dough remembers the heart that touches it. When your mind is divided, the bread loses its breath. When your heart is clear, it rises on its own." And with that, the woman disappeared into morning light, leaving only the faint scent of jasmine behind. Amanda stood motionless for a long time, hearing the truth echo in her chest. The next day, she began her work differently. Instead of rushing to finish, she breathed deeply before touching the dough, allowing stillness to settle between her thoughts. Each movement became a prayer. She poured intention into water, gratitude into flour, and peace into the rhythm of her kneading. Slowly, the dough began to respond, expanding with quiet life as if exhaling through her hands. From then on, she understood that bread was alive. It felt her presence, absorbed her emotion, mirrored her state of being. When she baked with worry, the loaves grew dense. When she baked with joy, they rose as if weightless. Her work became meditation. Each loaf was an offering to the invisible intelligence that flows through all creation. One afternoon, a wealthy merchant arrived demanding to buy her most magical bread. He offered silver coins and rare spices, but Amanda shook her head. "The bread is not for sale," she said. "It reveals itself only to those who are hungry in spirit." The man, irritated, insisted until she finally handed him a fresh loaf from her oven. He took it, scoffing, yet when he bit into it, his expression changed. The bread had turned to ash in his mouth. Confused, he dropped it and stormed away. Moments later, a hungry child entered shyly, asking if she had anything left. Amanda handed the same loaf, still warm. The child smiled, took a bite, and in her small hands the bread multiplied, enough to feed her waiting family. Watching from the doorway, Amanda wept. It was not charity that performed this wonder, but consciousness. The bread responded to the heart that received it. From that day, her bakery became a temple. She baked not for profit, but for presence. Each morning, she lit a single candle before the oven and whispered, "May what I create nourish more than the body." Those who came to her felt not the satisfaction of hunger, but the calm of being seen. Her bread became a language beyond words, a conversation between the visible and the unseen. Years later, when asked how she achieved such perfection, Amanda replied quietly, "The secret is intention. The universe listens not to your words, but to your vibration. When you move with love, even flower becomes sacred. When you act from fear, even miracles turn stale. The same law governs every act of creation. Whether you paint, heal, speak, or simply live, the essence of your work carries the frequency of your heart. If your purpose is clear, the world feels it. If your mind is divided, nothing you build will rise. There is no magic apart from this awareness. The hands may shape the form, but the spirit breathes life into it. Amanda's story is not about bread, but about consciousness. It teaches that everything you touch becomes a reflection of what you are. The universe is not moved by technique, but by presence. When you infuse your actions with clarity and love, you align with the creative pulse that animates all things. Life itself begins to rise around you. When night fell over her village, Amanda would sometimes sit by her empty counter, watching the stars flicker through the window. She felt the same warmth within her that she once felt in the bread, the same rhythm, the same quiet rising. In that stillness, she understood that her baking was only a doorway. What she had truly learned was how to let energy flow without obstruction, how to let the divine move through her ordinary hands. That is the real art of living, to do the simplest things with sacred attention until the ordinary becomes luminous. This is the power of voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to, where silence becomes communion and every act becomes prayer. The universe responds not to what you demand, but to what you embody. Amanda's loaves are long gone, yet their fragrance lingers in the story that carries her name. Somewhere, in the unseen kitchen of existence, the same dough is still rising, waiting for hands that understand the secret she discovered, that the highest magic lies not in doing more, but in being fully present with what is already in your care. In the sacred library of Alexandria, where the air shimmered with the dust of ages, lived a scribe named Aaron who wrote not with ink alone, but with awareness. His hands were steady, his letters precise, yet the scholars who read his work sensed something beyond skill. The words on his scrolls carried a strange vitality, as if they had been breathed into being rather than written. One night, while copying an ancient text, he felt the quill tremble between his fingers. The line he had intended to write vanished from his mind, yet his hand continued to move, guided by a current deeper than thought. When he looked down, the page was filled with phrases he had never seen, written in his own familiar hand. They spoke of mysteries he did not understand, of truths that felt older than time. He read them with awe, sensing that something immense had passed through him. From that day forward, the phenomenon recurred without warning. Some days his writing flowed with radiant wisdom. Other days, no matter how he tried, the words remained flat and ordinary. He could not summon the current at will, nor predict when it would come. The more he tried to control it, the quieter it became. Frustrated, he gripped the reed pen until his knuckles whitened, willing the words to return. Nothing happened. Then one evening, as the moon cast pale light across his desk, a blind poet passed by and heard his sighs. "You hold the pen too tightly," she said, her voice calm like the sea at dawn. "The universe cannot flow through clenched hands." Aaron frowned. "If I hold it loosely, how can I write at all?" The poet smiled. "By not trying to be the author. You are the instrument, not the composer." Her words unsettled him, yet they struck with undeniable truth. That night, he sat before a blank scroll and closed his eyes. Instead of forcing the words, he listened. The silence deepened until it felt alive, humming faintly around him. His breathing slowed. The pen began to move again, not as an act of will, but as the continuation of that stillness. The words that appeared were clear, gentle, and luminous. He read them later and wept, for they spoke directly to the part of him that no teaching had ever reached. From then on, Aaron practiced writing as surrender. He prepared the ink with reverence, cleansed his mind of expectation, and sat in silence until he felt the quiet pulse of the unseen moving through him. When he wrote from this place, wisdom poured effortlessly, and those who read his scrolls found themselves changed as if the words were mirrors revealing their own forgotten knowing. Over time, his reputation spread through the city. Philosophers came to study him, hoping to learn his method, but he told them there was no method. The hand that seeks to control cannot receive inspiration. Only an empty vessel can be filled. One renowned scholar, skeptical of such mysticism, challenged him to write on command. Aaron dipped his pen and waited, yet nothing came. The scholar smirked, satisfied. Later that evening, a weary traveler entered the library seeking comfort. Without effort, Aaron began to write again. Lines of tenderness and strength filled the page, and when he handed the scroll to the traveler, the man bowed in gratitude, tears glistening in his eyes. The scholar, watching from the shadows, understood then that wisdom is not a possession to be displayed, but a current that flows only through purity of intention. Aaron's life became a rhythm of giving and releasing, a continuous dialogue between the visible and the invisible. Some days he wrote words that transformed others. Some days he wrote nothing at all, yet even in silence, he sensed that the same force moved through him, shaping his being as surely as it shaped his scrolls. He began to see that the entire universe was writing itself through everything, through rivers carving valleys, through stars burning in endless patterns, through the small act of breath moving in and out. To align with this rhythm was to live in harmony with creation itself. Those who read his later works felt not that they were learning something new, but that they were remembering something ancient. The words did not instruct, they awakened. The ink carried no magic except the consciousness from which it was born. What Aaron learned in the quiet of his library applies to every soul. Each thought, each word, each act becomes sacred when born from surrender. When the mind releases its need to dominate, the divine expresses itself through even the simplest gesture. The true miracle is not in the writing, but in the emptiness that allows it to happen. In his final years, Aaron ceased signing his name on his scrolls. They belong to the silence that birthed them, he said. When he died, the scholars found hundreds of unmarked texts filled with wisdom that seemed to breathe as they read. Some claimed the words rearranged themselves according to the reader's need. Others said the ink glowed faintly in candlelight. But those who understood knew it was not the parchment that held power. It was the consciousness imprinted within it, the echo of a soul that had become transparent enough for truth to pass through. To this day, it is said that somewhere within the invisible halls of time, Aaron still writes, his hand guided by the same eternal current. And perhaps that current flows through you now, in the space between these words and your awareness, waiting for you to loosen your grip on how things must be, so that life itself can begin to write through you. For when you stop forcing and start allowing, you discover that creation was never outside you. It has always been your own voice, returning home through silence. In the mist-covered highlands of Kashmir, where dawn unfolded like a whispered prayer, lived a shepherd named Stephanie, whose flock was unlike any other. To passing travelers, her life seemed simple, spent among wool and meadow and wind. Yet those who lingered near her pastures often left changed, unable to explain the strange peace that settled over them as they listened to the quiet rhythm of her days. Stephanie had inherited the flock from her father, a man who taught her that tending sheep was less about control and more about presence. The animals, he said, follow not the whip, but the heart that understands them. She remembered those words, but never grasped their meaning until the morning she heard her sheep speak. It was not the bleating of hunger or warning, but words, clear and ancient, carried on the breath of the mountain air. At first she thought she had imagined it, the product of solitude and echo, yet the sound came again, low and calm, weaving through the wind. The eldest ewe turned its head toward her and said, "The mountain remembers every prayer." Stephanie froze. The world seemed to hold its breath. When she called others to witness, the flock returned to silence, grazing as ordinary beasts. She tried again the next day, waiting, listening, but heard nothing. Doubt crept in. Perhaps loneliness had shaped voices out of wind. Still, something within her shifted. She began to listen differently, not with her ears, but with her awareness. She noticed how each sound in the valley carried its own intention. The wind through grass murmured lessons of surrender. The river below hummed in tones of continuity. Even the silence between breaths vibrated with presence. Days passed, and one twilight, as she sat beside her flock, the same voice rose once more. "Why do you listen only with fear?" it asked. "The truth is not hidden from you. You are simply too loud to hear it." Her heart trembled. The ewe looked at her with calm intelligence. "Every creature carries a fragment of the same voice," it continued. "Stones, stars, rivers, and hearts. You call them separate because you do not yet hear their harmony." The voice faded, and night descended, but Stephanie did not sleep. She understood that the world had never been silent. It was she who had been deaf to its music. From that day forward, she stopped treating her flock as property and began to walk among them as kin. She learned to listen before guiding, to feel their moods like weather across her own skin. The sheep began to move with uncanny precision, grazing only where the grass was richest, avoiding storms long before they arrived. When travelers asked how she knew where to lead them, she only smiled. "I listened." Word of her gift spread across valleys until a scholar journeyed to meet her. He was a man of intellect, fluent in scripture and logic, certain that wisdom belonged to the learned. He found her tending her sheep at sunrise, her face serene beneath the shifting colors of light. "They tell me you speak with animals," he said. "Tell me what they say." Stephanie regarded him quietly. "They speak what you are not ready to hear." The scholar frowned. "I am ready for all truth." "Then listen." She gestured toward the flock. For a moment there was only wind and bells, then faintly a murmur rose like a chorus beneath sound itself. The scholar's face hardened. "I hear nothing," he said. Stephanie turned to him gently. "Because you listen for words, not meaning. The universe speaks in frequency, not form. It reveals itself through the ear of the heart, not the mind." The scholar left in irritation, muttering about superstition, but later that night, as he lay awake beneath the stars, he felt the pulse of silence around him, and for a moment sensed that something vast was listening back. Meanwhile, Stephanie grew deeper in her communion with the world. She began to hear the stones under her feet whisper of endurance, the snow on the peaks reciting verses of impermanence, and the fire crackling in her hut speaking of transformation. Each sound became scripture. She realized that divinity was not confined to temples or holy books, but scattered through existence like seeds, waiting for the consciousness prepared to perceive them. When her neighbors asked where her wisdom came from, she pointed to the earth. "Everything speaks," she said. "The question is who listens." One season, a child from a nearby village wandered into her meadow, weeping for his lost dog. Stephanie knelt beside him and listened. The wind shifted, brushing softly across her face. She smiled and pointed toward a distant ridge. "The dog is waiting there." The boy ran and returned minutes later, leading his companion, eyes wide with disbelief. "How did you know?" She touched her chest. "The same voice that moves through your love for him moves through the wind. It always guides the heart that listens without doubt." Over time, her meadow became a place of quiet pilgrimage. Those burdened by sorrow came to sit among her flock, finding comfort in the stillness that surrounded her. Some heard voices, others heard only silence, but all left lighter than when they arrived. They said the air itself seemed to speak. When asked about her secret, she replied, "I no longer seek to be heard by the world. I have learned to hear the world itself. That is the truest form of prayer." Years passed, and when she grew old, her hair turning silver like the morning mist, she told her apprentice, "Remember this. The universe speaks once to every soul, not through thunder, but through recognition. Its language is not sound, but resonance. To hear it, you must quiet the noise within." The apprentice asked how he would know when he had succeeded. She smiled. "When you can hear the stars grazing on silence, you will understand." When she passed, her flock continued to wander the valley without a shepherd, yet none were lost. Villagers swore they saw them move in patterns like sacred geometry across the hills, as if guided by an invisible presence. Some nights, when the wind was still, they claimed to hear a faint voice drifting through the heather, reminding them that every leaf, every breath, every heartbeat is part of a single great conversation. The story of Stephanie endures not as legend, but as memory of something we all once knew. The voice of creation has never ceased. It hums in the rhythm of oceans, in the pulse of blood, in the space between thoughts. It asks for nothing but our attention. The moment we listen with the whole of our being, the ordinary world reveals its extraordinary truth. There are no mute things, only unheard songs. To live with awareness is to return to that sacred dialogue, to recognize that what we call silence is simply the universe waiting for us to listen again. In a coastal city where the air carried the scent of salt and distance, there lived a sailor named Elias, who had spent his life mapping horizons that never stayed still. From boyhood, he believed that purpose lay in movement, that meaning was a thing found at the edge of the known world. His ship, the compass, was his sanctuary and his mirror, each voyage an attempt to chart not only the ocean, but the hidden currents of his own existence. Yet after years of sailing, the same question returned with every tide. No matter how far he traveled, he always felt incomplete, as if the sea itself were guiding him towards something that refused to appear. One night, while repairing his sails under the silver hush of moonlight, he noticed his compass spinning wildly, its needle trembling as though the very laws of direction had dissolved. Frustrated, he struck it against the mast, but the motion only grew more erratic. The sky was clear, the wind steady, yet the compass pointed nowhere. The crew grew uneasy. Without guidance, they drifted into uncertainty, and fear settled like fog upon the deck. For days, Elias tried everything he knew, consulting maps and stars, praying to the old gods of the sea, but nothing restored order. Then, in the midst of his desperation, a storm arose with sudden ferocity. Waves towered higher than masts, lightning split the sky, and the ship groaned under the weight of chaos. The crew screamed, but Elias felt an inexplicable calm. Something inside him whispered that resistance would only feed the storm. So instead of fighting, he released the wheel and let the wind take control. In that moment, something shifted. The storm did not subside, but his fear dissolved into an almost sacred stillness. He closed his eyes and felt the motion of the sea not as threat, but as rhythm, a vast intelligence moving through every drop of water. When he opened his eyes, he noticed the compass lying beside his feet. The needle had stilled, pointing north once more. But it was not the old north of charts and boundaries. It was an inner alignment, a direction that felt alive beneath his ribs. The storm faded as quickly as it had come. The sea calmed, and dawn broke with colors that seemed too vivid for the world he knew. In the quiet that followed, Elias understood that the compass had never been broken. It had only mirrored his confusion. The instruments of the world reflect the state of the one who wields them. When he was lost in striving, the compass spun without rest. When he surrendered, it found its way home. From that day, he no longer navigated by maps alone, but by an awareness that spoke beneath thought. The crew, seeing his serenity, began to trust his silence more than their instruments. When they faced fog or uncertainty, he would simply stand at the bow with his eyes closed until a feeling, gentle but precise, guided them forward. Each time they followed it, land appeared where none was expected. Soon, sailors from distant harbors came to learn from him, calling him the man who steers without seeing. But Elias knew he was not steering. He was listening. The sea, the wind, the stars, even the pulse of his own heartbeat formed one unbroken dialogue. Direction was not a fixed point, but a relationship. The more he trusted that inner compass, the clearer his path became. Years later, a young navigator joined his crew, full of ambition and intellect. He questioned Elias constantly, demanding formulas and explanations. "How do you know which way to go when the instruments fail?" he asked. Elias smiled. "The same way a bird finds its way home through darkness. It remembers what the mind forgets." The young man frowned. "And what is that?" "That the destination is never separate from the traveler. The sea is not your obstacle. It is your reflection. When you know this, every wave becomes guidance." The apprentice resisted the simplicity of the lesson. He wanted technique, certainty, something he could measure. So Elias handed him the compass and said, "When you can make this needle move by listening, you will understand." For days, the young man stared, concentrated, grew frustrated. The compass remained still. Finally, exhausted, he fell asleep holding it. In his dreaming, he found himself floating in a sea of light. The water spoke without words, and he understood that direction was not given but felt, born of unity, not control. When he woke, the compass in his hand glowed faintly, its needle steady as dawn. He looked at Elias with reverence, for he understood at last. Life, like the sea, cannot be mastered. It can only be trusted. The following voyages became effortless. Storms came and went, but they met each one with quiet certainty. Even when waves towered, their calm remained unbroken, for they had learned that surrender was not weakness, but alignment with the greater rhythm. When Elias grew old, he left the ship to his apprentice and retreated to a small island where no map dared mark its name. There, surrounded by silence, he carved a final message into the stone by the shore. The compass points where the heart is still. Those who seek direction must first cease to struggle against the current. The sea knows, the sky remembers. Trust is the wind that carries all souls home. When he passed, the tide rose and covered the stone, as if the sea itself had taken back its words. Sailors who ventured near that island often reported that their compasses behaved strangely, spinning and settling only when they surrendered their fear. Some said the island glowed faintly at night, pulsing with a light that seemed to breathe. Others believed Elias still guided lost ships, not through charts, but through the silent pull that every being feels when they stop fighting and start listening. The story of Elias remains a parable for all who wander. The path is never truly lost. What appears as chaos is the hand of the greater harmony correcting our course. The compass within us spins wildly, only when we cling to control. Once we let go, once we allow life to steer, the way becomes clear without effort. Direction does not depend on certainty, but on faith. The sea and the soul obey the same law. The current carries those who trust and exhausts those who resist. When we learn to navigate by stillness, every storm becomes a teacher and every detour a return. For what we call destiny is nothing more than alignment with the rhythm that has always known our name. In the high valleys of Tibet, where the wind moved like a quiet prayer through the banners of the temples, there lived a weaver named Rachel, whose hands seemed to hold the rhythm of creation itself. Her loom stood beside an open window overlooking the endless blue of the mountains, and from dawn until the last light, she wove threads of color so delicate they seemed to hum with a life of their own. Yet the miracle was not in her skill, but in what appeared within the fabric. Some days her cloth shimmered with patterns that seemed to shift and breathe, revealing shapes of futures yet to come. Other days, no matter how carefully she worked, the tapestry remained ordinary, flat, lifeless. She could not understand what made the difference. She used the same threads, the same patterns, the same patience, yet the result changed like the moods of the sky. One morning, as she sat in silence before her loom, an old merchant arrived carrying an ancient tapestry faded by time. He placed it before her, and as the dawn light touched the fabric, the colors shifted. "Do you see," he said softly, "how the pattern changes when viewed from different hours of the day?" She watched in awe as the threads glowed, revealing scenes that were invisible moments before. "Your loom is not bound to thread or time," the merchant continued. "It weaves what your heart is ready to reveal." Rachel pondered his words long after he left. She began to notice how her thoughts shaped the threads. When she worked in haste, the lines tangled. When she worked in peace, the fabric flowed as if guided by invisible hands. One evening, as the wind carried the chant of distant monks, she felt a stillness descend upon her. Her breathing slowed, her mind emptied, and she began to weave not from thought but from presence. The tapestry that emerged glowed with a radiance that seemed unearthly. Within it she saw the pattern of her own life, each joy and sorrow perfectly woven into a greater design. In that moment she understood that destiny was not a fixed picture but a living fabric that unfolded through alignment, not effort. From then on she no longer wove for patrons or merchants. She wove to listen. Each thread became a prayer, each color a tone of her inner being. Those who saw her work felt a calm enter their hearts as if they too had glimpsed the order behind all seeming chaos. When travelers asked for her secret, she said, "The future reveals itself only to the hands that move in harmony with time." Her words spread through the valleys, and people came from far lands seeking visions of what lay ahead. Some brought gold, others brought hope, but not all could receive what they desired. For those who came with impatience, her loom produced only empty shapes. But when a humble herder arrived, simply grateful to witness her art, the threads began to shimmer on their own, forming scenes of compassion that mirrored his own heart. Through such moments, Rachel learned that the loom responded not to will, but to consciousness. When she tried to control the pattern, it resisted. When she surrendered, it revealed. The tapestry became a reflection of the eternal truth that creation moves with grace only when the Creator ceases to impose and begins to trust. One cold morning, as snow drifted softly against her window, she whispered to her apprentice, "Time is not our enemy, it is our teacher. It reveals its secrets to those who no longer rush it." The apprentice, eager and young, asked how he could learn to weave like her. Rachel smiled. "When you can hear the silence between two heartbeats, you will understand the rhythm of the loom." As the years passed, Rachel's tapestries adorned temples and monasteries, not for their beauty, but for their energy. Monks would meditate before them, claiming that the patterns shifted with their state of mind, showing visions of light when their hearts were still, and dissolving into mist when doubt returned. The loom had become a bridge between worlds, and Rachel its silent guardian. When she grew older, her hands trembling slightly with age, she wove one final piece. It was not large, nor bright, nor complex. It was simple, soft, woven of ivory and muted gold. When she finished, she laid her palms upon it and whispered, "Let this cloth remember." When she passed away that night, the tapestry shimmered faintly, as if her last breath had become part of its light. Those who came after her swore that if one stood before it in absolute stillness, the threads began to move, forming patterns unique to each viewer, as if the universe were showing them their own hidden design. The story of Rachel endures as a teaching of divine timing. What we call fate is not a force that controls us, but a fabric that we co-create through our state of being. The more we resist, the tighter the knots become. The more we trust, the smoother the pattern unfolds. Every thought is a thread, every action a color, every breath a movement of the loom. When we align with the quiet intelligence that governs all creation, life begins to weave itself through us with effortless precision. There are moments when the threads seem tangled, when the design disappears into confusion, but if we hold patience and faith, the pattern reveals its harmony once again. This is the power of voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to. It is the stillness that weaves through every chaos, the rhythm beneath every change, the silence that holds all possibilities until you are ready to see. The loom of destiny never stops, but it waits for the weaver to remember that she was never separate from the threads. The tapestry of your life is forming even now, shaped by your awareness, your surrender, and your love. When your hands and heart move as one, you no longer create through force, but through resonance. You become the weaver and the woven, the pattern and the thread. And in that sacred union, everything that once seemed fragmented becomes whole. In the depths of Alexandria, where the scent of incense lingered between stone corridors and the air shimmered with old secrets, lived an alchemist named Alina, whose hands had touched every known metal, yet never found the one she truly sought. Her workshop glowed with the quiet fire of countless experiments. Shelves overflowed with jars of powders, vials of gold dust, and fragments of failed miracles. She had studied under the finest masters, memorized every formula, recited every invocation, and still the transformation she pursued remained elusive. One night, as the city slept, she sat before a copper bowl, staring into its dull reflection. She whispered the sacred words, adjusted the flame, and waited for the alchemy to unfold. Nothing happened. The copper stayed as it was, lifeless and unyielding. Frustration welled in her chest until it cracked into despair. In that stillness, an old man appeared at the edge of her workshop, his robe covered in the dust of travel. "You have learned the language of elements," he said, "but not the music they follow." She looked up, confused. "What music?" The old man smiled. The universe sings in frequencies. Transformation does not respond to force, but to harmony. When your heart is in discord, even gold will turn away. His words lingered long after he left. For days she pondered them, sitting before her instruments in silence. One afternoon, instead of reciting formulas, she simply placed her hand over a bowl of lead and closed her eyes. She slowed her breath until her thoughts dissolved. She could feel her pulse, steady and rhythmic, like the beating of some vast cosmic drum. Slowly, she began to hum, not with intention but with instinct, matching her tone to that inner rhythm. The air in the room seemed to shift. The lead shimmered faintly, soft light pulsing beneath its surface. Alina gasped, and the light vanished. The realization struck her with the clarity of lightning. The secret of transformation was not knowledge but resonance. She had been trying to command the elements instead of conversing with them. From that moment, she began a new practice. Before each experiment, she would align her mind and heart, emptying herself of ambition, letting the silence of the universe fill her. Sometimes the transformation came instantly. Other times, nothing happened at all. Yet even in failure, she felt no frustration, only peace, for she understood that the metals were mirrors, responding only to the frequency of her being. When she was restless, they remained unchanged. When she was still, they came alive. Word of her miracles spread through the city. Scholars and seekers came to witness her craft. Some watched her turn iron to silver with nothing but the warmth of her palm. Others saw ordinary water rise in light. Yet when they tried to imitate her, their efforts failed. They could not replicate what had no formula. A renowned philosopher demanded to know her method. She smiled. You cannot force the universe to change. You can only match its vibration and let it move through you. He frowned, unsatisfied. Surely you use technique. Knowledge is the bridge to mastery. No, she replied. Harmony is the bridge to creation. Knowledge without harmony is noise. The philosopher left in anger, but a young servant who had listened in silence approached her later. Mistress, he said quietly, if I have nothing to offer but my heart, can I learn this art? She looked at him for a long moment, then placed a small piece of copper in his hand. Close your eyes. Feel your breath until it becomes the same rhythm as the world. When you no longer know where you end, and the metal begins, open your eyes. He obeyed. Minutes passed. When he opened his eyes, the copper glowed faintly. Alina smiled. You see, the universe transforms not when you demand it, but when you become one with it. From that day, she no longer called herself an alchemist. She said she was a listener, a translator of the unseen. The elements, she believed, were not dead matter, but living consciousness waiting to be met in understanding. To her, transmutation was not about turning metal into gold, but about turning human struggle into awareness. The same principle that moved through lead and fire moved through the soul. What resists us outside is only what resists within. When we surrender the need to control, the transformation begins effortlessly. Years later, when Alina grew old, she wrote one final inscription above the entrance to her workshop. To change the world, first tune your heart. Those words became her final lesson. The room where she worked was later found empty, save for one bowl of gold gleaming softly in the dark, though no fire had been lit. Some said it was her last experiment completed in perfect harmony. Others believed she had dissolved into the very frequency she had sought all her life, leaving only the golden echo of her being behind. The truth was simpler. She had returned to the rhythm that creates all things. The art she discovered was not reserved for mystics or scholars, but for every soul willing to listen deeply. Every thought, every breath, every act carries a vibration that shapes what it touches. When our inner music aligns with the greater song, what we call miracles become natural. The metals of existence respond not to knowledge but to resonance. When we love without demand, create without fear, and act without grasping, we become the alchemist of our own reality. In that stillness where effort ends, the universe reveals itself as the true worker behind every transformation. All it ever waited for was our readiness to hum in tune with its infinite song. In the marble caves of Delphi, where whispers of smoke rose from the earth and prophecy hung in the air like perfume, lived an oracle named Lysandra, whose gift was unlike any who came before her. The world called her a seer, but she knew she was only a mirror. People traveled across deserts and oceans to kneel before her and ask the same ancient questions. Will I succeed? Will I find love? Will I be safe? The pool before her throne shimmered with silver light, yet for many it reflected nothing but their own faces. The oracle's voice was calm, her gaze neither harsh nor kind. The truth is never hidden, she said, only refused. One evening a wealthy merchant arrived, his robe heavy with gold thread, his voice trembling with greed disguised as confidence. Tell me when fortune will favor me. The oracle looked into the pool, but it remained still. She shook her head. The waters do not speak for those who have already decided what they wish to hear. He protested, offering gems, incense, promises of temples in her name, but she smiled gently. The pool has already spoken. It shows you yourself, unready to listen. The man stormed away, muttering that the gods were silent. Later that night, a wanderer entered the same chamber, her feet dusty, her eyes humble. She did not ask for wealth or destiny. She only whispered, "What truth am I afraid to see?" The pool trembled, then opened like a doorway of light. Images swirled across its surface, showing not the future, but the quiet strength hidden within the seeker's heart. The woman wept, not in sorrow, but in recognition. Lysandra understood then that prophecy was never about prediction. It was revelation, granted only to those who approached without demand. The divine could not be bribed or commanded, only invited. She began to notice that those who came seeking comfort received confusion, while those who came seeking truth found clarity beyond imagination. One day a scholar arrived, proud of his intellect, certain that he could interpret whatever she revealed. He spoke with precision, asking about the fate of kings, the movement of armies, the pattern of the stars. Yet the pool remained dark, as if turned to stone. You seek to dissect the mystery rather than become it, she said. The universe does not answer to the mind, only to the heart willing to dissolve in wonder. He left disappointed, while a shepherd who wandered in by accident received visions so luminous that he left trembling in gratitude. Word spread that the oracle's pool had moods of its own. But Lysandra knew it was not the water that changed. It was the consciousness of those who gazed into it. The pool did not reveal truth. It reflected readiness. Each soul saw what it could bear. Some saw light, some shadow, some nothing at all. One afternoon, as golden dust floated through the chamber, a child entered. She peered into the pool and laughed. "I see colors dancing," she said. Lysandra smiled. The pure heart never asks for proof. It simply sees. From that day, she no longer described herself as oracle, but as silence given form. She realized that truth needs no translation, only space to appear. The cave became her temple, not because of visions, but because of stillness. She learned that when she released the need to speak, the answers came of their own accord. People began to sense this shift. When they entered her presence, many felt their questions dissolve before they could be asked. It was as if the pool had moved into their own hearts. In her final years, Lysandra wrote a single sentence on the marble wall beside her seat. The universe does not hide its truth. It waits for your courage to see it. Her disciples carried that teaching beyond the cave, turning her silence into a way of life. They practiced listening not for voices from the sky, but for the quiet pulse of knowing that arises when thought grows still. And now I ask you, as you sit wherever you are, what truth waits beneath your noise? What question have you been asking life while secretly fearing its answer? Can you look into your own reflection without turning away? Perhaps the silence you resist is the very place your guidance has been waiting to appear. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the noise of your day fall away and notice what remains. It is not emptiness, but the living stillness that has been with you all along. It is the same pool that once shimmered in the oracle's cave, now resting in your chest, patient and eternal. Thank you for listening, for being here, for bringing your awareness to this space of remembering. Every story, every word, every silence between them is a mirror, inviting you to see what has never been lost. The oracle was never a woman in a distant temple. She was the voice within you, waiting for the moment you are ready to hear. High in the crystal mountains of Tibet, where sunlight fractured into rainbows through thin veils of mist, there lived a painter named Kale, whose art was said to open doorways between worlds. He worked in silence, his brushes carved from willow, his pigments ground from minerals found only in sacred caves. Travelers who visited his studio swore that his paintings moved when seen with the corner of the eye, and that the landscapes within them breathed as if alive. Yet to most, they appeared ordinary, nothing more than depictions of mountains and rivers. The difference was never in the paint, but in the perception of the one who looked. Kale discovered his gift by accident. As a child, he would paint not to imitate what he saw, but to express what he felt behind what he saw, the pulse that animated stone and sky. When he painted from that place of stillness, colors shimmered with impossible depth, and light seemed to emerge from within the canvas rather than fall upon it. He tried to explain this to his teachers, but they dismissed him. Art, they said, is imitation. Kale knew otherwise. Years later, when he had mastered every known technique, he abandoned them all. He began to paint only after meditating for hours, allowing the image to form inside him like a dream before his hand ever touched the brush. One morning, as the mist parted across the peaks, he painted a simple path leading toward a mountain ridge. To ordinary sight, it was nothing remarkable. Yet when a blind monk entered the room, he stopped before the painting and bowed. "There is movement in the silence," he said softly. "There is a gate of light that opens inward." Kale stared at the painting in astonishment. The monk could not see the canvas, yet he perceived what sight could not. That night, Kale tested it himself. He sat before the finished work, his breathing slow and even, and as the moon rose, he felt the edges of his awareness dissolve. The painting began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter until the air itself seemed to shimmer. The mountain within it stretched beyond the frame. Before he could think, he found himself standing on its slope, the scent of pine sharp in his lungs. The realization struck him with a calm awe. The painting was no longer an image, but an entry. The next morning he tried again, but nothing happened. Days passed before he understood. The doorway opened only when he was free of self, when he painted without intention, when his mind was as clear as the air before dawn. The boundary between worlds thinned. When he tried to repeat the miracle through desire, the door vanished. Word of his work spread through the monasteries, and pilgrims climbed the mountain to see him. Some saw nothing. Others saw light shifting beneath the surface like water. Those who came without expectation often wept, for they felt as if something within them had remembered its origin. Kale told them nothing. He only nodded and returned to his brush. His art was not for admiration, but for awakening. Each stroke was a prayer, each hue a vibration, meant to call forth recognition, not wonder. Once, a wealthy collector offered him gold beyond measure for a single painting. Kale refused. "The art does not belong to the one who paints," he said. "It belongs to the silence that paints through him." When the collector demanded proof of its power, Kale handed him a blank canvas. "This holds everything you can see," he said, "if you can truly look." The man stared for hours and saw only emptiness. Before leaving, he spat on the floor. The same day, a shepherd's daughter entered the studio, drawn by curiosity. She looked at the same blank canvas and smiled through tears. "It is so beautiful," she whispered. Kale asked what she saw. "The light that lives behind everything," she said. He bowed to her, understanding that her purity of heart had pierced the veil his art could only point toward. Over time, Kale's paintings became subtler. He used less color, fewer lines, until his final works appeared almost invisible. Visitors accused him of abandoning his craft, yet those who sat quietly before the faint traces of pigment felt their thoughts dissolve. The paintings no longer depicted, they transmitted. He had reached the point where expression turned into transmission, where the image became the mirror of the viewer's own consciousness. Late in his life, Kale wrote on the back of his last canvas, "The The true artist does not create beauty, he reveals perception. When he died, his studio was found empty except for one unfinished painting, a swirl of gray and gold that seemed to shift with the light. Monks who guarded it later claimed that on nights of deep silence, when the wind stilled and candles flickered, the painting opened into a horizon beyond sight. Yet they agreed on one truth. The miracle was never in the canvas. It was in the readiness of the eye that beheld it. Cale's legacy endures not as art, but as a reminder that vision is not given by the world. It is awakened within. The doors of perception do not open outward, but inward, through the surrender of what thinks it is looking. The painter, the paint, and the act of seeing were never separate. They were one continuous creation, breathing through all things. Those who understand this no longer seek to find beauty. They become it effortlessly, in every glance, in every moment of seeing the invisible made visible through the stillness that lives behind all form. In the hidden valleys of Persia, where the wind carried the scent of cedar and ancient hymns echoed through the canyons, there lived a musician named Seraphine, whose flute was said to hold the breath of the divine. She did not play for audiences or acclaim. Her music was an offering to the silence between worlds. At dawn, she would walk to the edge of a sacred spring where mist rose from the water like prayer, and there she would play until the air itself seemed to listen. Travelers who happened upon her melodies spoke of feeling their burdens dissolve, of grief loosening its grip, of time slowing until everything shimmered with quiet meaning. Yet Seraphine never sought to heal. She only played what she heard within. The flute was her companion since childhood, carved from the bamboo that grew beside the spring. Her father had told her that the reed was once a plant that learned to sing by being hollow. To carry the breath of spirit, it had to let go of its own sound. Those words stayed with her. She practiced not to master notes, but to become as empty as the flute itself. The more she released control, the purer the tones became. Each note seemed to know where it needed to go. Some nights her music drifted through the valley, reaching villages miles away. The sick claimed to awaken, cured. The lonely found peace, and children dreamed of luminous gardens. When asked how she created such miracles, she simply said, "The melody heals only those who are open to hearing it. The sound does not change, the listener does." Her gift drew the attention of kings and scholars who invited her to their courts, but each time she declined. "The song belongs to the wind," she said, "not to walls of gold." One day, a merchant who had lost his sight came to her spring. "I have traveled far to hear you," he said. "They say your flute restores what is lost." Seraphine nodded and began to play. The music rose like light, trembling through the air. Yet the man sat motionless, his expression unchanged. When she finished, he wept. "I felt beauty, but my eyes remained dark." She placed the flute in his hands and whispered, "The sound you heard was not for your eyes. It was for the vision that lives behind them. Go home and listen again in silence." Days later, he returned, radiant with calm. "The world is brighter," he said, "though I still do not see. My blindness has become a doorway." Seraphine smiled, for she knew the song had done its work. Not every healing restores what was. Some awaken what has always been. As the years passed, her melodies deepened. She began to notice that the flute played differently depending on who listened. When hearts were closed, the notes fell heavy like rain on stone. When hearts were open, the same song became weightless, luminous. She realized that the music was alive, shaped by the consciousness of those who received it. One evening, a prince visited her, tormented by sleeplessness and fear. He demanded a song to quiet his mind. She lifted the flute and played, but the sound that came forth was dissonant, restless, echoing his own turmoil. Furious, he accused her of mockery. She met his gaze with calm compassion. "The flute only mirrors the one who listens." He left in shame, but later returned with humility. "Play again," he said softly. "I am ready to listen." This time the melody flowed like water over stone, smooth and eternal. The prince fell to his knees as tears washed away years of hidden pain. When he rose, his eyes were clear, his breath steady. He bowed to her and said, "You did not heal me. You reminded me how to hear." From that day, She became known not as musician but as messenger of harmony. Her presence carried the same stillness as her music. When she played, even the birds grew silent. Villagers said the wind itself paused to remember its own beginning. She taught those who came to her that true music is not made by breath, but by awareness. The instrument is only the passage through which life sings. The listener and the sound are not two, but one movement of the same presence. When she grew old, her flute cracked in two and could no longer play. The villagers grieved, believing her gift was lost, but Seraphine only smiled. The music does not live in the flute. It lives in the space it once filled. That night, as she sat beside the spring, the air began to hum with a faint tone, though no instrument remained. Those who listened swore they heard her melody woven through the wind, softer than thought, yet clear as love. Some say it still plays on quiet mornings when mist rises from the water and hearts are willing to hear. This is the power of voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to. It is the same silence that taught Seraphine her music, the same stillness that turns emptiness into song. The healing she brought was never sound, but remembrance. Every soul is a flute carved by life, and the breath of the universe moves through it in every moment. When we stop grasping, when we allow the hollow within us to open, the music plays by itself. The world does not need more songs, it needs more listeners, more beings, quiet enough to let the divine wind move through their being. Then even silence becomes symphony, and the simplest breath becomes prayer. In the silent gardens of Kyoto, where the air carried the faint perfume of camellias, there lived a monk named Rian, who was entrusted with the care of a single stone. It rested at the center of the monastery courtyard, surrounded by white sand raked in perfect circles. Visitors often asked why the monks tended a single stone with such devotion when entire temples crumbled nearby. Ryan would answer quietly, because this stone remembers what we forget. Each morning before dawn, he would sweep the garden, tracing new lines into the sand as mist rose from the earth. He never changed the stone's position, never adorned it, never sought to interpret its meaning. His task was not to understand, but to keep the space around it clear. For years he performed this ritual with steady discipline, believing it to be an act of service to something larger than himself. Yet one winter morning, as snow began to fall, he felt an unexpected hollowness. The stone looked lifeless, its surface dull and cold. He found himself asking for the first time, "What am I really guarding?" His question disturbed the silence. That night sleep eluded him. The sound of snow against the wooden eaves grew into a rhythm that pulled him from his bed. He walked barefoot into the courtyard. The garden lay untouched beneath a thin blanket of white. The stone was barely visible, hidden beneath the snow, yet the air around it felt alive. In that moment he realized that all his years of care had been for something he had never truly seen. He had polished the symbol, but forgotten the essence. Kneeling before the stone, he brushed away the snow with trembling hands. Beneath his touch, the surface glistened faintly as if it were breathing. A memory stirred within him, ancient and familiar. He remembered his master's words from long ago: "The stone is not the teaching, the space around it is." Brian closed his eyes and felt the stillness expand. The stone was no longer an object before him, but a mirror reflecting his own awareness. The circles he had drawn in the sand were not for the stone, but for his mind, tracing the pattern of its restless movement around what is eternal and unmoving. For the first time he understood. The stone was the center of stillness that life perpetually circles, the axis that never moves while everything else changes form. From that morning on, his practice changed. He no longer raked the sand to perfection. He let the wind shape its own lines. He no longer swept away fallen leaves, allowing them to rest where they landed. The other monks whispered that he was neglecting his duty, but the abbot only smiled. "Let him continue," he said. "He is learning the art of allowing." Seasons passed, and those who visited the garden began to notice a strange peace emanating from it. The patterns in the sand were no longer precise, but alive, shifting with rain and shadow. The stone seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, not from polish, but from presence. Pilgrims said that sitting near it calmed the mind as if the weight of years dissolved into air. One afternoon, a traveler approached Ryan and asked, "What power lies in this stone that it brings such stillness?" Ryan answered, "None. The power lies in the one who stops searching for power. The stone is only a doorway. The traveler frowned. Then what is beyond the doorway? Ryan smiled gently. Nothing, and that nothing is everything. The man pondered his words, but Ryan had already turned back to his broom. In time, Ryan's garden became known as the Garden of Silence. Masters from distant monasteries came to study his method, but he had none to offer. The secret, he said, is not in the act, but in the absence within the act. When you sweep, sweep without the thought of cleaning. When you sit, sit without waiting for peace. The stillness you seek cannot be achieved, only revealed. In his final years, Ryan wrote one sentence on a strip of parchment and placed it beneath the stone. It read, "When the mind stops circling, the stone becomes the sky." No one saw him again after that night. The monks found his robe folded neatly beside the courtyard and the stone untouched. Yet those who entered the garden felt his presence woven through the air, quiet and infinite. The circles in the sand had vanished. Only smoothness remained, as if the wind itself had bowed in reverence. Centuries later, the monastery still stands. The garden is unchanged, the stone still at its center, surrounded by endless space. Visitors who arrive burdened by thought often leave with tears they cannot explain. The silence speaks to them not in words, but in remembering. It reminds them that peace is not something to be created but uncovered, that all motion in life turns around a stillness that has never moved. This is the power of voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to, the same space that Ryan guarded with devotion until it revealed itself as the essence of all things. The stone was never sacred by itself. It became sacred through the attention it inspired, the mirror it offered to every restless soul. When we learn to be still as the stone, the noise of the world fades into understanding. What remains is not silence as absence, but silence as fullness, the vast awareness that holds everything without needing to change it. That is where truth begins and where all journeys end. In the desert of Sinai, where the horizon dissolved into heat and silence, there lived a wanderer named Amara who carried no possessions except a small bowl carved from olive wood. She had once been a scholar, keeper of scrolls and knowledge, but after losing her home to war, she abandoned all titles and began to walk. The bowl was the only thing she kept, not for its value, but for its emptiness. Each night she would fill it with water from the sparse wells she found and drink slowly, as though the act itself was prayer. Over time, she noticed that the water never tasted the same. Some nights it was cool and sweet, other nights bitter or flat. She began to wonder if it was the well that changed or her own being that flavored the water. One evening, as the sun sank into crimson haze, she met an old hermit sitting beneath an acacia tree. He greeted her with calm eyes that held the depth of still rivers. "Why do you wander, child?" he asked. She lifted her bowl and answered, "I am searching for the spring that never runs dry." The hermit nodded. "Then stop walking. The spring is not ahead of you, it is beneath you." His words lingered, like heat in her chest. That night she did not travel. She sat in the sand, staring into the bowl. For the first time she noticed that even when empty, it reflected the stars. She understood then that the bowl was a mirror, and what she sought outside was only the reflection of what already lived within. From that moment her journey changed. She still walked, but not to arrive. Each step became a circle, a quiet return to presence. The desert, once vast and cruel, turned luminous. The same wind that once stung her skin now felt like breath. The same silence that once felt heavy now whispered. Everything around her was still the same, yet nothing was as it was. One morning, she found herself near an oasis, where a group of travelers had gathered, arguing over the last remaining water. Their voices clashed, filled with fear and possession. Amara stepped forward and offered her bowl. "Take what you need," she said. They laughed bitterly. "There is not enough for all." "Then let the water choose," she replied, and set her bowl into the pool. The wind stirred, and ripples spread outward until the surface shimmered like liquid glass. The bowl filled itself and overflowed, spilling into the sand, and where the drops touched, new shoots of green began to rise. The travelers fell silent, awestruck. She lifted the bowl and drank, then passed it to the nearest man. The water was now clear and abundant. No one could explain what they had seen, but from that day, wherever she traveled, wells began to restore themselves after years of drought. She said nothing of miracles. When asked for her secret, she only smiled. The world gives itself freely to the hands that no longer grasp. Years passed and her legend grew, yet she remained the same, walking, listening, carrying her bowl of light. Once a king summoned her, seeking wisdom to heal his divided kingdom. When she arrived, he offered her gold and power if she would teach him peace. She set her bowl before him. "What do you see?" she asked. The king looked and said, "I see my reflection." "Then you understand," she said softly. "Until you see beyond yourself, peace will remain a word." The king was silent. He bowed his head, and for a moment the hall filled with stillness so deep it felt like eternity breathing. Amara left before dawn, leaving the bowl behind. The next morning the king found it filled with rainwater, though the sky was clear. He kept it beside his throne as a reminder that leadership begins not with control, but with emptiness. In her final days, Amara returned to the desert where her journey had begun. Her steps grew slower, her breath lighter, but her eyes were radiant, reflecting the same quiet vastness that surrounded her. She placed her bowl on the sand and whispered, "I am ready to pour back what was never mine." When the wind rose that evening, the bowl tipped, its water absorbed into the earth. The next morning, where it had rested, a small spring emerged, clear and endless. Travelers still drink from it today, calling it the Well of Returning. They say its water changes flavor with each soul who drinks, tasting of what the heart most needs to remember. Some find sweetness, others salt, others the faint taste of tears. But all agree that it carries peace. This is the power of voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to, the same silence that filled Amara's bowl, the same stillness that turns emptiness into abundance. Her life became the lesson she had sought. The spring that never runs dry is not in the world, but in awareness itself. When the seeker stops chasing and becomes the vessel, life flows without end. What the mind calls empty, the heart knows as full. What the world calls silence, the soul knows as song. When we learn to drink from that well, we no longer thirst for answers, for we realize we were never separate from the source. The bowl and the spring, the desert and the wanderer, the question and the silence are all one. And in that realization, the journey finally rests.